Welcome to Mindless Entertainment. It is I, God Empress Jesse Milestone, and we're going to bang out some Patreon suggestions over the next few days, because I always save a bunch of them till the end of the month, because I'm a procrastinator. Anyway, today, this is for Charles Anderson. Charles Anderson brought up an interesting point, because we never get tired of talking about the prequels. Let's remember that. Right? If we want to debate lovingly and in a friendly and understanding way about Star Wars that we hate, we can talk about the prequels. And that's a thing. I just kind of want to bring that up for a quick second there, right? That's when you know something is wrong, right? Because there are people who hated the prequels. There are people who loved the prequels. And back before there was other Star Wars controversy, that was Star Wars controversy. Did you like them? Did you hate them? Let's talk about it. People weren't spewing hatred at each other if you liked or disliked the prequels. People weren't taking sides of like, oh, you're evil and bad if you feel this one way or not this other one. You just liked it or you didn't. And you could talk about it. People could concede some points. Like, yeah, okay, I like the prequels. Jar Jar Binks is stupid. So I have a friend who says Jar Jar Binks is her favorite character in the prequels, and we're still friends. I think it's ridiculous, and we talk about why I think it's ridiculous and why she doesn't, but we're still friends. There's no animosity. There's no deep-seated but we'll get to more of that later. We'll get to one of the many reasons for that later on. Right now, I specifically want to talk about the topic Charles Anderson requested, which is Anakin's fall to the dark side. And he asked me if I had my own conception about how that fall happened, because he had an idea of his own about, some way that seemed to him more compelling than just he's afraid of his wife dying in childbirth. It was a good reason. It was a very good reason. I solid, excellent, good reason. Accept it 100%. And I can understand why he doesn't like the way they did it. Now, I would say, for me, that fear of loss, because that's really what it is. If you take it out of it's more simplistic. Oh, he thinks that she's going to die in childbirth. Blah, blah, blah. It's a fear of loss, right? That you're talking about someone, and you can get deep and psychological about it too. And I think there's an extent to which George Lucas did. He really ruminated and thought about these characters. He had been thinking about Anakin Skywalker and this backstory since he wrote the original Star Wars movie. So I think that there are a lot of deep layers there that exist. Like, you're talking about someone who has had, in the course of his life, he's had an attachment to two women. He had a very strong attachment to his mother. She was his only love and caretaker, and et cetera, et cetera. And he watched her die, and he couldn't save her. And that was a big point of trauma, as we see in the prequels. And so this fear of losing his, and because I don't even think it's that necessarily has to, and yeah, it is a little trite, and I think it's a little more packaged for children, to have it be like, oh, well, he thinks that she's going to die in childbirth, he has the vision that that's going to happen, and so he needs to do everything he can to stop it. And I think that's a dumbed down version of how I read it, and which is why I'm totally okay with how it is, which is, it's, and they kind of cover it in the movie a little bit, but this whole idea where, like, he couldn't save his mother, therefore that made him feel powerless, that made him feel upset, and he wants to do everything in his power to make sure that never happens again, make sure that doesn't happen again. And of course he has these strong and healthy bonds with because he has a strong and healthy bond with Padme because she's the only woman in his life once his mother dies. And so I think that it's a relatively subtle psychological crumbling in a way, and that you see in executed better in more complicated films, where it's that small little nagging fear, that nagging doubt, that nagging sense that you're out of control, that one thing that sort of triggers you in that way, that slowly eats away at him and makes him susceptible, makes him a good target for the dark side, and susceptible to that, matched with the seductiveness of the dark side. And you're talking about someone who to date is the most force-powerful Jedi we've met, because Rey hasn't been born yet. But anyway, so you have that seductive element working in play with his fear, because that's how the dark side works, right? Which is a really, really beautiful thing that you see a lot of in the prequels, is the way that power preys on that fear to become this force that takes you into the dark side. All the subtlety, by the way, completely missing from Disney Star Wars movies. So yeah, Mr. Ryan Master of Subversion Johnson, you missed a few things from the Star Wars universe that make it subtle and complex. Subtlety, I would like to read a dictionary definition of that to you, because I'm pretty sure you have no idea what that is. Anyway, back to the point. So you have that, and I really like that. And so for me, I never read that as like, oh, he's afraid that Padme's gonna die in childbirth, so he has to become evil and do all this crazy shit to prevent that. I always read that as here's a boy, a lost boy who is full of all this raw power and energy, and that is slowly corrupted by his fears, his insecurities, the normal human things. And this is again part of that duality of why, oh, he's too old to train, why we don't take Jedi, you know, when they're this developed as people, is because a lot of those insecurities, those fears, those doubts, those things that shape you and form you have settled in your person at that point, and the potential for them to corrupt you is so high. And like all those little levels and layers and things that are totally in there, and I think consciously and purposely, are for me what those are the good things about the prequels. Like I've said this before. For me, the prequels are not just 3 shitty movies. The prequels had everything they needed to be the movies George Lucas wanted them to be. The execution just fell short in some key ways. So Charles, I hope that answers your question. And I will expound upon that even more to say that the movies that I grew up watching, we had VHSs, a box set VHS that my parents probably got when we were little, being like they need to see Star Wars because they were smart parents, and they had those interviews on them I just it was funny, I just watched one of them again because of you, Charles, because they're on the discs that you gave me, which are amazing, and they're having an interview, and it's right at the time where George Lucas is getting ready to jump back in and make the prequels. Which I didn't even remember, but I did remember. What I did remember was growing up, I always felt like I kind of knew sort of knew what the backstory was there, kind of had a sense of what that backstory was, and I just had this, it was very much like In George We Trust, you know, because I was so into it and so obsessed with it. And that for me, which was interesting, and something that's a little different from the way I normally get into things too, is a lot of people that got really into Star Wars and they dove into the EU and they read every single book, and they were all about the extended universe and the fantasy element of it, which is a very Jesse thing to do. That's how I usually want to immerse in that storytelling world. But for some reason, and I think this is one of the reasons why I stayed involved in film and the magic of filmmaking today, is that's the one that picked my interest as a movie. Like, how did this get made? Who are the people behind it? Who came up with this genius? I think that probably helps that there was a wonderful making of doc that was playing at the IMAX theater at my science museum when I was a kid that I saw probably 8,000 times while I was there. So for me, I just knew, because I read so much and knew so much about George Lucas, how the whole story was there from the beginning. The whole original trilogy was there, and as he got into developing that, the backstory for Anakin came to him, and that all existed. You know, by the time A New Hope came out, all of those pieces existed in his mind. It wasn't that he wrote A New Hope thinking maybe he'd write the other two. He wrote a story that was Star Wars and condensed it into A New Hope, hoping that he would get the opportunity to make the other ones, and then one day the prequels, etc. So that was all there. So I always had this profound sense of, if George Lucas says this is how it happened, that's how it happened. You know? And this just trust, and maybe that's what causes me to look deeper at it and find justifications and reasons for why it is. I really think that everything I said is very obviously there in the films if you're willing to look for it. And it's hard sometimes to look past the sloppy execution, you know, the bad acting, the plot points that don't quite come together. It can be hard to look past that, but which is why I'm grateful that I was the age that I was when the prequels came out, because I was still sort of able to approach that with a little bit of that childlike sense of wonder. And so a lot of those things that came to bother me later didn't bother me then. So there are certain elements of the story that I think hit me deeper than I would have let them had I been older and more skeptical. But I just always had this, again, like I said, I trusted George Lucas. If George Lucas said this is why it happened, I believe that's for someone to carry that in him, this story in him for so long, to me is so profoundly just huge. It's huge to me. This is the guy who came up with it. Like, he created Star Wars, and there's something incredible and beautiful about that and that's a big thing that Disney lacks too, is and that's why it's harder to watch those and more heartbreaking, is because it's not the creator anymore. It's not the person. I mean, and not just to be like, well, it's not George Lucas, so it's not real. But you have to understand, George Lucas, this is a beautiful world he came upon in his brain, he created, he envisioned, he it was there. It's always lived. The whole story has lived with him since A New Hope, and to then just take that away from him and to treat him like his ideas don't matter, like that is just, to me, that's the travesty of what happened there. Is to just be like, you guy, you did all this stuff, great, we don't care, we're better than you. And that kind of attitude, the Rian Johnson attitude, is why I will never get behind the Disney Star Wars movies. But anyway, I hope that answered your question, Charles, and a whole bunch more information. Thanks for that great suggestion. Makes me really happy. Very pleased about it. I hope it's always fun to talk. Always fun to talk a little Star Wars prequels, something that doesn't tear my soul out as much. I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you guys want to make Patreon suggestions too, you can contribute to my Patreon. It's a fun, awesome place. There's a lot of videos you don't get to see, like the entirety of my Mount Baldy hike, which is up there right now. If you like to see beautiful views of mountains, and other things. But yeah, I will be coming back to you very soon. Bye.